My name is Alex. I was 22 when this happened, and at the time I thought I understood how abandoned places worked. I'd been exploring old structures for a while with two friends, mostly out of curiosity and boredom. Nothing extreme, just the usual kind of wandering you do when you want to feel like you've discovered something no one else bothered to look at. This place started as a rumor. A large rural property about an hour outside the city. Locals called it the farm, but no one seemed to agree on who actually owned it. Every time we asked around, we got a different answer. One person said it belonged to a horse breeder who moved away. Another said it was seized years ago. Someone else insisted it was still privately owned and actively monitored. That last part should have been enough to make us avoid it. But it didn't. We went anyway. It took us almost 2 hours to find the entrance road because it wasn't marked properly. Just a narrow dirt path hidden behind overgrown trees and a rusted gate that looked like it hadn't been opened in years. My friends Ryan and Mason were already joking about it being a waste of time as we walked in, but I remember feeling something different. Not fear, exactly. More like the sense that the place was too quiet, even for something abandoned. No birds, no wind through open fields, just a kind of dead stillness that sat over everything. We followed the path deeper in. That's when we saw the first signs that someone was still using the land. Fresh tire tracks. Not old ones, not weathered. Recent. We stopped for a moment, unsure if we should continue, but Ryan shrugged it off. Probably just hunters, he said. That explanation should have made sense, but it didn't feel right. The deeper we walked, the more unusual things we noticed. Old fencing that had been repaired recently. Wooden posts that looked newer than everything around them. Even animal troughs that didn't seem like they belonged in an abandoned place. Then we saw the horses. A small group grazing in a wide field near the edge of the property. Well-kept, healthy, clearly not stray animals. That confirmed it. Someone was maintaining this place. We should have turned around right there. Instead, we kept going. Further in, the landscape changed. The trees opened up into a wide clearing where several structures sat across the land. A main house, partially collapsed in one section but still standing, a long barn that looked recently patched, and then something that made all three of us stop walking at the same time. Cars. Not one, not two. A cluster of them. Parked near the barn, partially hidden under tarps and vines. Some looked new enough to still reflect sunlight. Others were stripped down, missing parts, sitting in a way that made no sense for an abandoned farm. Mason whispered, "That's not normal." We didn't move closer at first, we just watched. Then we noticed movement near the house. Someone walking between structures. We ducked behind a broken fence line, staying low and quiet. From where we were, we could see more detail now. The property wasn't abandoned, it was being actively used, but in a way that didn't match anything we expected. There were tools out, equipment, even lights mounted near one of the sheds, though none of them were turned on at the moment. Ryan pulled out his phone and started recording. That's when we heard a van in the distance. A van. It came down the dirt road slowly, then stopped near the gate we had entered from. The engine stayed running. We froze. The van didn't move for a while, just sat there like it was waiting. Then it turned around and left out. No one got out, no one checked anything. It was like they were confirming something and leaving. Mason whispered that we should leave immediately. And I agreed, but Ryan wanted to go a little further in first, just enough to understand what was going on. We followed him reluctantly. We moved along the tree line toward the main house, staying low and quiet. That's when we noticed something strange about the layout of the property. It wasn't random. Everything seemed positioned around the main house in a way that made the center of the property feel controlled, like all the paths naturally led back to it. As we got closer, we saw more vehicles, some covered, some not. A few looked like they hadn't moved in years, but others looked freshly used. Then we saw the shed. It was half open, leaning slightly, with a strong smell coming from inside that I still can't fully describe. It wasn't just rot, It was something heavier, like decay mixed with chemicals. Ryan joked nervously, trying to lighten the mood. None of us laughed. We were too focused on the fact that the house windows were not all broken. Some were intact, and one of them had curtains that looked recently adjusted. That's when I saw it. A figure inside the house, just for a second, standing near a hallway window, partially obscured, then gone. My heart dropped. We should have left right then, but instead, everything escalated in a way none of us expected, because we weren't alone on the property, and something had already noticed us. We should have left the moment we saw that figure in the window. That was the thought running through my head, clear and loud, while my body did something else entirely. I stayed frozen behind the fence line with Ryan and Mason, all three of us trying to make sense of what we had just seen. A single movement in a house that was supposed to be abandoned. Ryan lowered his phone slightly. "Tell me I didn't just see that," he whispered. Mason didn't answer. He was already looking toward the shed again, like he was trying to confirm reality from a different angle. And then it happened. A sound from the main house. Not loud, not dramatic, just a door closing. Soft, controlled, like someone had done it without rushing. That's when all three of us backed up at the same time without saying a word. We started moving away from the clearing, still crouched, trying not to draw attention, but the problem was simple. The property wasn't designed for easy escape. Everything funneled back toward the center before it spread outward again. No matter which way we moved, we kept ending up visible from at least one structure. And now, we knew someone was inside. Or several someones. We were halfway back toward the tree line when I noticed something new. The van was back. Not parked where it had been before, closer this time, positioned near the dirt road but angled so the headlights pointed slightly into the property. Engine off, doors closed, no one visible. It hadn't been there when we first looked. That meant it came back, quietly, while we were inside. Mason grabbed my arm. "We need to go, now." This time, Ryan didn't argue. We started walking faster, still trying to stay low, but clearly no longer concerned about being subtle. The horses in the distant field started shifting as we moved, heads turning in our direction. One of them let out a sharp sound that cut through the silence. That sound made everything worse, because it wasn't just us reacting anymore. The environment was reacting too. We broke into a faster walk, then a jog once we reached the trees. That's when I heard footsteps behind us. At first, I thought it was just branches or our own movement echoing wrong, but then it repeated, clearer, deliberate. Ryan heard it too. He looked back once and immediately said, "Don't stop." We ran. The tree line wasn't thick enough to fully hide us, so every few seconds I glanced sideways and saw gaps between trunks that showed parts of the property still behind us. The main house, the shed, the vehicles, and movement. Not chasing yet, just positioning. Like whoever was there wasn't rushing because they already knew the layout better than we did. Mason tripped once, caught himself, kept going. None of us stopped to help properly because stopping felt like the wrong decision. Then, from behind us, a sound I'll never forget. A whistle. Short, controlled, not random. That whistle made Ryan say something I still think about. He said, "They're not lost out here." That's when we realized something important. We weren't being chased blindly. We were being guided back toward a direction they wanted. We changed course slightly, cutting deeper into the woods instead of following the original path. The ground got rougher, harder to run through, but it broke the line of sight from the property. For a few minutes, we didn't hear anything except our own breathing. Then Mason stopped suddenly. We almost ran into him. He was staring ahead. "There," he said. At first, I didn't see it. Then I did. Another structure, smaller than the main house, half hidden in brush we hadn't seen on the way in. A second building. We hadn't known it was there. And that was the worst part, because it meant the property wasn't just big, it was layered. Ryan shook his head. We didn't pass this. Mason looked at me. We didn't see this on the way in. None of us moved closer. We just stood there, breathing hard, realizing the map in our heads didn't match the reality around us. From somewhere behind that structure, we heard movement again. Not fast, not panicked, just steady footsteps crossing dirt, then stopping, like someone had reached the edge of their space and was waiting. We backed away slowly this time instead of running. That decision probably saved us, because as soon as we turned, we saw lights flick on near the main house. One by one, not floodlights, smaller mounted lights, turning on in sequence across the property like someone was activating zones. Ryan whispered, "They're lighting it up." And he was right. The entire center of the property was becoming visible now. No more hiding in shadows. We were exposed. We ran again, this time full sprint. Branches hit our arms, ground shifted under our feet. At one point, I lost sight of Mason for a second and panicked until he reappeared ahead of us. Behind us, I heard something else now. A vehicle engine starting. Not the van, something heavier. Then another engine. Multiple sources. They weren't rushing. They were pacing us. We broke through the tree line and hit the dirt road again, the same one we had entered from. The gate was still open, but now it felt different looking at it from this side. Like it wasn't an exit, just a boundary they allowed us to reach. We didn't stop. We ran straight through it. No one followed immediately. That silence was worse than any chase. We didn't slow down until we were far enough away that the property disappeared behind the trees and terrain. Only then did we stop. We were gasping, hands on knees, trying to understand what had just happened. Ryan checked his phone again. The recording was still running, but the last few minutes were just blurred motion and sound. No clear evidence, just panic. Finally, Mason spoke after a long pause. "I don't think that place is abandoned," he said. I nodded slowly. "Yeah." Then Ryan added something quieter. "I don't think it ever is." We stood there for a while longer before deciding not to go back, not even to investigate properly, not even to confirm anything. Because deep down, all of us understood the same thing. We hadn't stumbled onto an abandoned property. We had walked into something that was still being used, still active, and still watching. And the worst part wasn't what we saw. It was the feeling that we were only ever allowed to leave because someone decided we were done being observed. I used to work the overnight shift at a roadside inn just outside of Cedar Hollow, Pennsylvania. It wasn't a big chain hotel or anything fancy. Just a two-story brick building tucked beside a highway exit with 36 rooms, a flickering vacancy sign, and a lobby that always smelled faintly like burnt coffee and lemon cleaner. I worked alone most nights from 11 p.m. until 7 a.m. At first, I actually liked the job. I'm naturally quiet, and overnight shifts suited me. Most nights were completely uneventful. Truckers checked in late, families stopped for a few hours of sleep during road trips. Sometimes older couples came through after concerts in the city. After midnight, though, the place usually went dead silent. The front entrance locked automatically at 12 p.m., so guests needed their room key to enter. Anybody else had to buzz at the glass door and I'd unlock it from behind the desk. Most of my shift consisted of staring at security cameras, doing laundry, or watching videos on my phone while pretending to organize paperwork. The lobby itself was small. A front desk, a few leather chairs, an old television mounted in the corner that rarely worked properly. Behind the desk was a back office with another monitor, a coffee machine, and a couch where I sometimes sat when things were slow. That night started like any other. It was raining hard outside. Around 1:40 a.m., the buzz at the front door startled me because I had nearly fallen asleep in the office chair. I checked the camera monitor. A man stood outside under the awning. He looked to be maybe late 40s or early 50s. Tall, thin, gray hoodie underneath a dark rain jacket, baseball cap pulled low enough that I could barely see his eyes. I pressed the unlock button. The door clicked open and he stepped inside slowly, dragging a black duffel bag behind him. "Need a room?" I asked. "Yeah," he answered quietly. His voice sounded rough, almost tired. He walked to the desk without taking his eyes off me once. I remember that clearly. Most people glance around the lobby or check their phones while checking in. This guy just stared directly at me the entire time. I asked for ID and a card. He handed me a driver's license with the name Victor Hale printed on it. The photo looked old, but it matched him enough that I didn't think much about it. Then he handed me a debit card. I ran the card. The machine beeped. Approved. At least that's what I thought. I handed him a key card for room 307 on the second floor. For a few seconds, he just stood there holding the card and looking at me with this blank expression that made my stomach tighten. Then he nodded once. "Thanks," he muttered. He turned and walked toward the stairwell instead of the elevator. I watched him disappear through the camera feed and then went back to scrolling on my phone. Around 1:15, I noticed movement in the lobby camera again. Victor was back downstairs. At first, I assumed he wanted coffee or ice, but instead, he walked over to one of the chairs near the television and sat down facing the dark screen. The TV wasn't even on. He just sat there, completely still. 5 minutes passed, then 10, then 20. He didn't move except occasionally turning his head toward the desk whenever I shifted in my chair. I started feeling uncomfortable. I told myself maybe he couldn't sleep. Travelers do weird things at night. Some people drink coffee at 2 a.m., some walk the hallways, some sit in silence because they've been driving 12 hours straight. Still, something felt wrong about him. At around 1:40, I got up to refill my water bottle near the vending machines. As I crossed the lobby, I could physically feel him watching me. I glanced sideways just once. He wasn't blinking. His eyes followed me the entire way across the room. I hurried back behind the desk. That uneasy feeling stayed with me afterward, the kind that settles low in your stomach for no real reason. To distract myself, I opened the reservation system on the computer and started checking tomorrow's bookings. That's when I noticed something strange. Room 307 showed vacant. I frowned. I refreshed the screen. Still vacant. I checked the transaction logs. No payment. No guest name, no check-in. At first, I assumed the computer system had glitched. It happened occasionally when the internet lagged during storms. But then, I searched for the debit card transaction. Nothing. My chest tightened. I distinctly remember hearing the approval beep. I even remember handing him the key card. I pulled up the electronic lock records next. Every room key swipe gets logged automatically. Room 307 showed 0 entries that night. Nobody had opened the door. I slowly looked up from the monitor toward the lounge area. Victor was still sitting there staring at the blank television. A cold wave rolled through me. He never went upstairs. I sat frozen for maybe 30 seconds trying to figure out what to do. Finally, I picked up the desk phone and called room 307 anyway. The phone rang and rang. No answer. Because nobody was in the room. I hung up and looked toward him again. He was staring directly at me now. Not casually, not absent-mindedly, just staring. I quickly looked back at the computer screen. Every instinct in my body started telling me this guy wasn't supposed to be there. Around 2 a.m., I finally worked up enough courage to approach him. "Sir?" I said carefully. "Everything okay?" He turned his head slowly toward me. For a second, he didn't answer. Then he smiled just a little. "I can't sleep," he said softly. Something about the way he said it made my skin crawl. I nodded awkwardly. "Well, if you need anything, just let me know." He kept smiling. Then he turned back toward the blank television screen. I walked back behind the desk, trying not to show how nervous I suddenly was. My hands were shaking. About 20 minutes later, I looked up again. The chair was empty. My stomach dropped instantly. I stood up and scanned the lobby. No sign of him. Then I spotted movement near the hallway leading toward the vending machines and public bathrooms. He was standing half hidden in the darkness near the end of the hall. Just standing there, motionless, watching the front desk. The overhead light barely touched his face, but I could still see the outline of his smile. For a few seconds, neither of us moved. Victor just stood there near the dark hallway, smiling faintly, while rain hammered against the lobby windows behind me. The light above him flickered once, and his face disappeared into shadow before reappearing again. Something deep in my gut told me I needed to get away from him. I quickly sat back down behind the desk and pretended to focus on the computer screen, but my eyes kept darting upward toward the hallway camera monitor. He was still there, completely motionless. The only movement came from the slight sway of his jacket whenever the air conditioner kicked on. I reached for my phone under the desk and texted my manager. Something weird going on. Guy may not actually be guest. No response. She was probably asleep. I considered calling the police right then, but part of me still worried I was overreacting. Maybe the computer really had glitched. Maybe he was mentally ill or intoxicated, but harmless. Then, Victor suddenly stepped backward into the darkness of the hallway, out of sight. I immediately stood up. My pulse started pounding in my ears. The hallway he disappeared into connected to the vending area, public bathrooms, and a side exit that remained alarmed after midnight. If he opened that door, I'd hear it instantly. But the alarm never sounded. I stared at the camera monitor. No movement. Then another camera feed flickered. Victor had somehow appeared upstairs on the second-floor hallway camera. I physically jumped in my chair. I hadn't heard the stairwell door open. I hadn't heard footsteps. Yet there he was, slowly walking down the hallway near the guest rooms. My throat went dry. He stopped outside room 214. Just stood there, facing the door. Not knocking, not moving, just standing inches away from it. I watched for nearly a minute before he slowly continued walking again. Every hair on my arm stood up. I grabbed the office phone and called my manager again. This time she answered groggily. "What? There's a guy here pretending to be a guest. I think something's seriously wrong." "What do you mean, pretending?" "I checked the system. His payment's gone. There's no reservation. The key never got used." There was silence for a second. Then I heard her wake up instantly. "You need to call the police." "I know. Now!" The line disconnected. My hands shook so badly, I almost dropped the phone dialing non-emergency dispatch. While I spoke quietly to the dispatcher, I kept watching the cameras. Victor continued drifting through the hotel like he was studying it. Second floor, stairwell, back downstairs, near the ice machine, then back into the lobby again. At one point, he stood directly beneath the camera and looked straight upward into it. I swear it felt intentional, like he knew I was watching him. The dispatcher said officers were on their way. I glanced at the clock, 2:47 a.m. Those next 15 minutes felt endless. Victor returned to the lounge chair again and sat perfectly still facing the dead television. I tried keeping my breathing steady. Then suddenly, he stood up, slowly, and started walking toward the front desk. Each step sounded louder than it should have on the tile floor. I froze. He stopped about 6 feet from the counter. For a moment, he simply stared at me. Then his eyes drifted toward the hallway behind the desk, leading to the back office. You ever notice how easy it is to walk into places at night? I didn't answer. His eyes wandered around the empty lobby. Nobody pays attention. I felt my throat tighten. Then the front door buzzer suddenly sounded. The sharp noise nearly made me jump out of my skin. Victor's head snapped toward the entrance. 2 police officers stood outside under the awning. The moment Victor saw them, his entire expression changed. Not panic, not fear, annoyance, like they had interrupted something. I quickly buzzed the officers inside. They entered fast. "Sir, step away from the counter," one officer ordered immediately. Victor slowly raised his hands and backed away without arguing. The second officer came over to me while the first questioned him near the lobby chairs. "Are you okay?" he asked. I nodded.
though honestly I felt seconds away from throwing up. The officer asked for Victor's ID. Victor handed it over calmly. The officers exchanged a look almost immediately. One of them walked outside to the patrol car while the other kept Victor talking. A minute later, the officer returned. "That ID's fake," he said quietly to his partner. My chest tightened. They placed Victor in handcuffs right there in the lobby. He didn't resist at all. As they searched him, they found multiple stolen credit cards in his backpack, along with latex gloves, a flashlight, zip ties, and a small pry tool. The sight of the zip ties made my blood run cold. One officer walked back over to me afterward, while Victor sat handcuffed near the door. "Did he ever enter a room?" he asked. "I don't think so," I answered shakily. The officer nodded grimly. "We've had reports about somebody matching his description staying in hotels overnight, pretending to be guests. What was he doing?" The officer hesitated slightly before answering. "We're not fully sure yet." That response terrified me more than if he'd simply said robbery, because it meant they genuinely didn't know. Before taking him outside, Victor suddenly turned toward me one last time. Even handcuffed, he looked strangely calm. Then he smiled again. "You should really lock the office door at night." One of the officers immediately shoved him toward the exit. The lobby doors shut behind them, and silence flooded the building again. I stood there frozen for what felt like forever. The officer who stayed behind helped me review the security footage afterward. That was when things somehow became even worse. For nearly 3 hours, Victor had been wandering every floor of the hotel, stopping outside occupied rooms, listening at doors, standing motionless in stairwells. At one point, he walked behind the building and checked multiple first-floor windows from outside. And the strangest part? Several times on camera, he appeared to stare directly towards security cameras he shouldn't have even noticed, almost like he already knew where they were. The police eventually left around 5 a.m. My manager came in early after I called her crying from the back office. I never finished that shift, and I never worked another overnight job again. A few weeks later, I learned through one of the officers that Victor wasn't even his real name. The man had prior arrests for burglary, stalking, fraud, and breaking into occupied homes. They believed he intentionally targeted quiet roadside hotels because night clerks were usually alone. I still think about that night constantly, mostly because of one realization that still makes me sick whenever it crosses my mind. If I hadn't checked the reservation system out of boredom, I probably would have never realized he wasn't supposed to be there at all.